The opulent halls of the Ivory Casino in Monte Carlo shimmered under crystal chandeliers, where fortunes danced on the spin of a roulette wheel, and secrets lurked in the haze of cigar smoke. It was the evening of March 15th, 1935, and the air buzzed with the clink of champagne glasses and the murmurs of the elite. Sir Reginald Hawthorne, the casino's imperious owner, sat at the high-stakes poker table, his face a mask of triumph as he raked in another pile of chips. But as he raised his flute for a victorious sip, his eyes widened in horror. He clutched his throat, gasping before collapsing amid the scattered cards. Whispers rippled through the room. Poison. Who among the glittering guests had orchestrated this deadly hand? The game, it seemed, had only just begun. Chapter 1. The Fatal Toast. The Ivory Casino, perched like a gleaming pearl on the cliffs of Monte Carlo, was a monument to opulence, its marble facade kissed by the Mediterranean's azure breath. On the evening of March 15, 1935, its halls thrummed with the pulse of high society, lords and ladies, tycoons and titled exiles, all drawn to the intoxicating whirl of chance. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across velvet drapes and polished floors where the clink of champagne flutes mingled with the soft shuffle of cards and the murmurs of fortunes won or lost. The air was thick with cigar smoke and ambition, a heady perfume that masked darker currents, secrets, grudges, and whispered betrayals. At the heart of this glittering stage sat Sir Reginald Hawthorne, the casino's formidable proprietor. A man in his late 50s with silver-streaked hair and a jaw carved from granite, he presided over the high-stakes poker table like a monarch over his court. His wealth, amassed through a labyrinth of colonial investments and gaming enterprises, was the stuff of legend, though whispers of sharper practices, rigged tables, coerced partnerships, trailed him like shadows. Tonight his eyes gleamed with triumph as he raked in a pile of chips, his deep voice booming over the table. "Gentlemen, ladies, fortune favors the bold," he declared, lifting a flute of champagne in a toast that would prove his last. The table was a microcosm of Monte Carlo's elite. To Hawthorne's right sat his wife, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, a vision in emerald silk, her diamonds sparkling with a cold fire that matched her strained smile. At 35, she was a woman of striking beauty, but her eyes betrayed a weariness, as if the weight of her husband's empire pressed upon her. Across from her was Victor Langford, a dashing Englishman in his early 40s, his tailored suit unable to mask the nervous twitch of his fingers. A gambler by trade and ruined by outcome. Langford's recent losses to Hawthorne had spiraled into a debt of $50,000, a sum that could break a man. Marie Duval, the casino's vivacious hostess, flitted about the table, her French accent lilting as she poured champagne, though her sharp gaze missed nothing. In her late 20s, she was a fixture of the Ivory, her charm a veneer over a rumored penchant for pilfering from the casino's coffers. Dr. Elias Thorne, Hawthorne's business partner, sat with clinical detachment, his spectacles glinting as he adjusted his cards. A man of 50, his reserved demeanor hid a mind sharp enough to navigate the casino's murky finances. Finally, Count Dmitry Volkov, a Russian émigré with a brooding intensity, completed the circle. His dark eyes and aristocratic bearing hinted at a past steeped in mystery, and his presence at the table was a curiosity to all. The game had reached a fever pitch, chips piling like small fortresses before Hawthorne. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the hall like a herald of fate. "To fortune's favor!" Hawthorne bellowed, raising his flute. The others followed suit, glasses catching the light like stars. But as the champagne touched his lips, a shadow crossed his face. His hand trembled, the flute wavered, and a gasp tore from his throat. He clutched at his collar, eyes wide with terror, before collapsing onto the table, scattering chips and cards in a chaotic cascade. The flute shattered on the green baize, its contents pooling like liquid gold. A woman screamed. Lady Evelyn, her composure shattered. Langford leapt back, his chair clattering to the floor. Duval froze, tray trembling in her hands. Thorne's face was a mask of shock while Volkov's eyes narrowed, calculating. "Mon Dieu!" cried a guest as the room erupted in chaos. Dealers halted their wheels, patrons pressed forward, and whispers of poison slithered through the crowd. The scent of arsenic, faint but acrid, hung in the air, confirmed by the froth at Hawthorne's lips. Staff ushered guests away, sealing the gaming room as Inspector Jacques Moreau of the Monte Carlo Gendarmerie arrived, his mustache bristling with authority. A stocky man in his 40s, Moreau surveyed the scene with a practiced eye. "Murder," he declared, his voice cutting through the din. "Arsenic, likely. Nobody leaves." The suspects were corralled into a private salon, their faces a gallery of fear, defiance, and calculation. Lady Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, though her tears seemed rehearsed. Langford lit a cigarette with shaking hands, muttering about his innocence. Duval hovered near the door, her fingers twisting her apron. Thorne adjusted his spectacles, his calm unnervingly intact. Volkov leaned against a wall, his silence louder than words. Into this charged atmosphere stepped a diminutive figure, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his mustache waxed to perfection. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, had been vacationing in Monte Carlo, drawn by whispers of intrigue at the Ivory. His green eyes sparkled with curiosity as he approached Moreau. "Mon ami," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "A crime such as this demands the little gray cells. May I assist?" Moreau, though skeptical, nodded. Poirot's reputation preceded him, and the inspector was out of his depth in this den of high society. Poirot began his examination, his movements precise, almost theatrical. He knelt by Hawthorne's body, noting the froth, the spilled champagne, the scattered chips. The flute's shards were gathered by a trembling waiter, but Poirot's attention lingered on the table. "The poison was in the glass," he murmured. "But who placed it there?" He turned to the suspects, his gaze piercing. "Each of you was near. Each of you had reason." Lady Evelyn was first. Seated in the salon, her poise faltered under Poirot's scrutiny. "Reginald was demanding," she admitted, her voice a silken thread. "We had our differences, but murder? Never." Yet Poirot noted her hesitation, the flicker of guilt in her eyes. Whispers of an affair in Paris, coupled with Hawthorne's vast estate, painted a motive as vivid as her emeralds. She claimed to have stepped away for a shawl during the toast, but no one corroborated her absence. Victor Langford was next, his cigarette smoke curling like a confession. "Hawthorne cheated me," he spat, his voice raw. "That game was rigged. I lost everything." His debt was no secret, and his desperation was palpable. He insisted he had visited the lavatory moments before the toast, but a waiter's glance suggested otherwise. Poirot's pencil tapped his notebook, a rhythm of suspicion. Marie Duval, her French accent thicker under pressure, fidgeted as she spoke. "Monsieur Hawthorne, he knew too much," she said cryptically, then caught herself. "Blackmail?" She admitted to minor thefts, jewels from the safe, but swore she wished him no harm. Her role as hostess gave her access to the champagne, but she claimed to have been serving another table. Dr. Thorne, composed yet pale, adjusted his glasses. "Reginald and I disagreed on business matters," he said coolly. "Embezzlement? Preposterous." Yet Poirot uncovered a heated argument over casino funds, and a diamond cufflink found near the body bore the initials E.T. Thorne dismissed it as coincidence, but his eyes betrayed unease. Count Volkov, his Slavic accent thick, spoke sparingly. "Hawthorne was a swindler," he said, his voice like gravel. "But I am no murderer." A past deal where Hawthorne had outmaneuvered him left a scar of revenge. His absence during the toast was noted but unverified. As Poirot gathered these threads, a servant approached with a discovery. A forged gambling chip in Hawthorne's pile, its marking subtle but deliberate. A clue, Poirot mused, or a deception. He paced the casino floor, the chandeliers casting long shadows. The motives were clear: greed, betrayal, revenge, but the truth lay buried in lies. Then, as the night deepened, a folded note slipped under Poirot's door, its message scrawled in haste. Cease your meddling or join the dead. Poirot's mustache twitched, a smile of defiance. The game. It is afoot, he whispered. But as he stepped into the corridor, a faint sound, a footstep, echoed in the dark. The Ivory Casino held its secrets close, and one among its glittering guests was playing a deadly hand. Who would strike next? Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The Ivory Casino's grandeur seemed to mock the grim tableau within its walls, where the scent of spilled champagne and arsenic lingered like a malevolent guest. The gaming room, now a crime scene, was cordoned off by Inspector Moreau's men, their boots scuffing the polished marble as they guarded the exits. Outside, the Mediterranean whispered against the cliffs, its rhythm a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted only hours before. It was past midnight on March 15, 1935, and the air in Monte Carlo carried a chill that no amount of opulence could dispel. Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective with a mustache as precise as his mind, stood at the center of the storm, his green eyes glinting with the promise of unraveling the enigma of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder. Poirot's presence at the Ivory was no mere happenstance. Vacationing in Monte Carlo to indulge his penchant for observation, he had been drawn to the casino by whispers of its darker undercurrents, tales of rigged games, hushed scandals, and fortunes lost in the blink of an eye. Now faced with a murder as audacious as it was calculated, he felt the familiar thrill of the chase. Order and method, he murmured to Inspector Moreau, who hovered nearby, his notebook already filled with hasty scrawls. These are the keys to unlocking the puzzle of human folly. Moreau, a stocky man with a penchant for efficiency, nodded grudgingly. Monsieur Poirot, your reputation precedes you, but this is Monte Carlo. Motives here are as plentiful as the chips on the tables. Poirot's mustache twitched in amusement. Précisément, mon ami. And it is in the abundance of motives that we shall find the truth. The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, had been sequestered in the casino's private salon, a room of crimson velvet and gilded mirrors that seemed to amplify their unease. Each bore the weight of suspicion, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions, from Lady Evelyn's tear-streaked composure to Volkov's icy reserve. Poirot began his interrogations, his manner courteous yet relentless, as if peeling back the layers of a particularly intricate onion. First he approached Lady Evelyn, seated on a plush divan, her emerald gown pooling around her like a dark sea. Her diamonds caught the candlelight, but her eyes were shadowed, her hands clutching a lace handkerchief. "Madame," Poirot began, his voice soft but probing, "your husband's death, it is a great shock, no? Yet I sense a complexity in your grief." Evelyn's lips trembled and she dabbed at her eyes. "Reginald was a difficult man," she admitted, her voice a silken whisper. "He demanded perfection, in business, in marriage, but to wish him dead? Monsieur Poirot, you wound me." Yet her hesitation betrayed her. Whispers of an affair in Paris, coupled with the promise of inheriting Hawthorne's vast estate, painted a motive as vivid as her jewels. She claimed to have stepped away to fetch a shawl during the fatal toast, but no servant could confirm her absence. Poirot noted her evasive glance, jotting a single word in his notebook. Inheritance. Next, Victor Langford, his once dashing demeanor frayed by desperation. He stood by a window lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled like autumn leaves. "Hawthorne cheated me," he spat, his voice raw with bitterness. "That game was rigged. I lost 50,000, my entire fortune." His debt was no secret, a wound laid bare by his reckless wagers. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And so, monsieur, you sought revenge?" Langford's face flushed. "Preposterous. I was in the lavatory when he drank. Ask anyone." But a waiter's fleeting glance suggested Langford had lingered near the bar, close to the champagne tray. Poirot's pencil tapped rhythmically, another note. Desperation. Marie Duval, the casino's hostess, was a study in nervous energy, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron as she faced Poirot. Her French accent, usually a charming lilt, thickened under scrutiny. "Monsieur Hawthorne, he knew too much," she said, then caught herself, eyes wide. "Knew what, mademoiselle?" Poirot pressed, his tone gentle but unyielding. She faltered, admitting to pilfering jewels from the casino's safe, minor thefts, she insisted, to escape a life of servitude. Hawthorne had discovered her secret, threatening exposure. "I wished him ill, perhaps," she whispered, "but not dead." As the hostess, she had poured the champagne, her tray a potential vehicle for poison. She claimed to have been serving another table during the toast, but her nervous demeanor suggested otherwise. Poirot scribbled, "Blackmail." Dr. Elias Thorne, Hawthorne's business partner, sat with the calm of a man accustomed to precision, his spectacles glinting like twin moons. "Reginald and I had disagreements," he said coolly, adjusting his cuffs. "Business matters, nothing more." But Poirot had uncovered whispers of embezzlement, funds siphoned from the casino's coffers. A diamond cufflink engraved with E.T. found near Hawthorne's chair raised questions. Thorne dismissed it as coincidence, his voice steady but his eyes uneasy. "A doctor deals in life, not death," he protested. Yet his access to poisons and his proximity to the fatal glass were undeniable. Poirot's note was succinct: embezzlement. Count Dmitri Volkov, the enigmatic Russian, leaned against a mirrored wall, his dark eyes unreadable. "Hawthorne was a swindler," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "He ruined my family years ago in a rigged bet. Revenge then was his motive, a vendetta nursed across continents. His absence during the toast was noted but unverified, his alibi as elusive as his past. I am no murderer," he insisted, but his intensity suggested a man capable of cold calculation. Poirot wrote, "Revenge." As Poirot gathered these fragments, a servant approached, his face pale. "Monsieur, we found this among the victim's chips." He held out a forged gambling chip, its markings subtle but deliberate, a counterfeit designed to pass unnoticed. Poirot turned it over in his gloved hands, his mind racing. "A clue," he murmured, "or a deliberate misdirection?" The chip's craftsmanship suggested intent, but whose? Langford's financial ruin, Duval's thefts, or a deeper game? Poirot paced the salon, the chandeliers casting long shadows that danced like specters. Each suspect had motive, opportunity, and secrets. Lady Evelyn's inheritance, Langford's debts, Duval's blackmail, Thorne's fraud, Volkov's vendetta. Each thread wove a tapestry of deceit. But the poison so precisely administered required planning, access, and nerve. The champagne flute, now in evidence, bore traces of arsenic, its shards a silent witness to the crime. As the interrogations concluded, Poirot stepped into the corridor, his mind a whirl of possibilities. The casino's opulence seemed to close in, its mirrors reflecting 1,000 truths and lies. He reviewed his notes, the motives forming a constellation of guilt. But a new discovery halted his thoughts. A waiter, trembling, approached with a folded note slipped under Poirot's door moments before. Its message, scrawled in hasty ink, chilled him. "Cease your meddling, or join the dead." Poirot's mustache twitched, not in fear but in defiance. "The murderer grows bold," he whispered, tucking the note into his pocket. He returned to the gaming room where the table remained untouched. A frozen moment of tragedy. Examining the scene anew, he noted the positions. Hawthorne at the head, Evelyn to his right, Langford opposite, Duval circling with her tray, Thorne adjusting his cards, Volkov momentarily absent. The champagne had been poured from a single bottle, yet only Hawthorne's glass was tainted. How? A faint clue emerged, a smudge on the table near where Thorne had sat, suggesting a spilled drop of champagne or poison. Poirot's gray cells churned, piecing together the sequence. Had the glass been switched, spiked during a distraction? The forged chip nagged at him, a red herring or a key. As dawn's first light crept through the windows, casting a pallid glow, Poirot overheard a hushed exchange. Duval, lingering near the salon door, whispered to a waiter, "He saw me. He knew." "Who?" Poirot's ears pricked, but she vanished into the crowd. He followed, only to find her gone, her tray abandoned. Suspicion deepened, but so did the mystery. The night stretched on, the casino a labyrinth of secrets. Poirot stood alone, his silhouette small but resolute against the grandeur. The threat, the chip, the smudge, each was a piece, but the puzzle was incomplete. And then a sound, a soft footstep in the darkened corridor. Poirot turned, his hand on his cane, senses alert. "Who is there?" he called softly. Silence answered, but the air grew heavy with menace. The Ivory Casino was a stage, and the next act was poised to unfold. Who among the glittering guests held the poisoner's hand? The shadows held their breath. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Velvet Lounge. The first light of dawn crept over Monte Carlo's cliffs, painting the Ivory Casino's arched windows with a ghostly glow. The Mediterranean's ceaseless murmur was a distant counterpoint to the tension that gripped the sealed gaming room, where Sir Reginald Hawthorne's body still lay. A grim centerpiece amid scattered cards and shattered glass. The air, heavy with the acrid trace of arsenic and the lingering perfume of high society, seemed to pulse with secrets. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming, stood at the heart of the crime scene, his green eyes scanning the tableau with surgical precision. The threat slipped under his door, "Cease your meddling or join the dead," had only sharpened his resolve. "The little gray cells," he murmured to himself. "They thrive on such challenges." Inspector Jacques Moreau, his mustache bristling with frustration, paced nearby, his men stationed at every exit. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice edged with impatience. "We have 5 suspects, a poisoned glass and a forged chip. But where is the thread that binds them?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile of confidence. "Patience, mon ami. The truth, it hides in the details, and we shall coax it out." The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, had been reconvened in the casino's velvet lounge, a sumptuous chamber of crimson drapes and gilded mirrors that seemed to amplify their unease. The room, lit by flickering candelabras, cast long shadows that danced like conspirators. Poirot, his notebook in hand, began his next round of inquiries, his voice a blend of courtesy and steel. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, his accent crisp, "the poison was in the champagne, delivered with the precision of a maestro. But by whom? Let us peel back the veils of deception." He turned first to the physical evidence, shared by Moreau's team. The autopsy hastily conducted confirmed arsenic, swift, merciless and undetectable until the victim's final gasps. The shattered flute bore fingerprints. Hawthorne's, naturally, Duval's as she had served the drink, and curiously Dr. Thorne's, who claimed he had merely adjusted the glass during the game. A simple gesture, Thorne insisted, his spectacles glinting. I was ensuring Reginald's comfort. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A gesture, monsieur, that places you at the heart of the crime. Lady Evelyn was summoned next, her emerald gown now slightly creased, her composure fraying like fine silk. Poirot had uncovered a damning clue, letters hidden in her suite, passionate missives from a lover in Paris, urging her to escape Hawthorne's control. Madame, Poirot said, his tone gentle but probing. These letters suggest a motive most profound, freedom, wealth, and perhaps love? Evelyn's face paled, her hand clutching her diamonds. I loved Reginald once, she whispered, but he became a tyrant. Still, I did not kill him. Her alibi, fetching a shawl, remained uncorroborated, and the letters hinted at desperation. Was her grief a performance, or a red herring? Poirot noted, affair. Victor Langford, his cigarette now a stub, faced Poirot with a mix of defiance and dread. I told you Hawthorne ruined me, he said, his voice hoarse. But murder? I'd rather expose him. Poirot pressed. And yet, monsieur, a waiter saw you near the bar where the champagne was prepared. A convenient moment, non? Langford's eyes darted. I was getting a drink, nothing more. But the waiter's account was vague, and Langford's sweat betrayed him. His motive, financial ruin, was clear, but was he cunning enough for poison? Poirot wrote, opportunity. Marie Duval, her apron discarded, stood with a nervous energy that belied her usual charm. I served the drinks, she admitted, her French accent thickening, but I touched nothing else. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. Mademoiselle, you spoke of Monsieur Hawthorne knowing too much. What secrets did he hold? She faltered, confessing to stealing jewels from the casino safe, a crime Hawthorne had discovered. He threatened to ruin me, she said, tears welling. But I only wished to escape, not to kill. Her access to the champagne tray made her a suspect, but her fear seemed genuine. A red herring or a clever act? Poirot jotted, guilt. Dr. Thorne, his calm a thin veneer, adjusted his spectacles as Poirot confronted him about the cufflink marked E.T. A coincidence, Thorne insisted. Many have such initials. But Poirot had learned of a heated argument with Hawthorne over missing funds, thousands siphoned from the casino's accounts. You had motive, monsieur, Poirot said, and access to poisons as a doctor. Thorne's face tightened. I am a healer, not a murderer. Yet his fingerprints on the flute were damning. Poirot's note, deception. Count Volkov, his Slavic intensity like a storm cloud, spoke sparingly. Hawthorne swindled my family, he said, his voice low. A bet in St. Petersburg rigged to ruin us. His motive, revenge, was potent, and his absence during the toast raised questions. I was in the smoking room, he claimed, but no one could confirm it. His cold eyes suggested a man capable of calculated violence. Poirot wrote, vendetta. As the interrogations unfolded, a servant approached with a new discovery. A hidden ledger found in Hawthorne's private office, its pages detailing financial irregularities. Thorne's signature appeared on dubious entries pointing to embezzlement. I was framed, Thorne protested, his voice rising. Poirot's gray cells whirred, noting the ledger's torn pages, evidence destroyed or hidden. The lounge grew stifling, the suspects' glances darting like trapped animals. Poirot paced, piecing together the fragments. The forged chip, the cufflink, the ledger, all were clues, but some were distractions. The fingerprints on the flute suggested Thorne, but Duval's access was undeniable. Lady Evelyn's letters pointed to betrayal. Langford's debts to desperation, Volkov's past to vengeance. The threat against Poirot hinted at a murderer desperate to conceal their tracks. Then a scream shattered the silence, echoing from the casino's balcony. Poirot and Moreau rushed out, finding Marie Duval slumped against the railing, a vial in her hand, her face pale. "Poison," she gasped before collapsing. Moreau's men summoned a doctor who confirmed a mild sedative, not arsenic. She would survive. "Suicide?" Moreau wondered aloud. Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. A second attempt at murder, or a ploy to divert us." He examined the vial, its label smudged, and noted Duval's trembling hands. Had she staged her own poisoning to deflect suspicion, or was she a target? Returning to the lounge, Poirot observed the suspect's reactions. Lady Evelyn's eyes widened in shock, but was it genuine? Langford's cigarette fell, his face ashen. Thorne adjusted his glasses, his calm unnerving. Volkov's expression was unreadable, his hands clenched. The ledger, now in Poirot's possession, revealed more, coded entries suggesting a secret account possibly linked to one of the suspects. Was it Thorne's embezzlement or something deeper? Poirot's mind raced, reconstructing the fatal toast. The champagne bottle was untainted, meaning the poison was added to the flute. Duval had poured, Thorne had touched. Langford was nearby, Evelyn absent, Volkov missing. The forged chip suggested a scheme beyond murder, financial sabotage. The cufflink, perhaps planted, pointed to Thorne or Volkov. And the note, its scrawl matched no one's hand, yet felt deliberate, a warning from the shadows. As the suspects dispersed, Poirot lingered, his gaze falling on a peculiar stain on Volkov's cuff. Champagne? Or something else? He approached the Count, who bristled. "You accuse me, Belgian?" Poirot smiled thinly. "I accuse no one. Yet." But the stain nagged at him, a clue or a misstep. The dawn grew brighter, casting the casino in a surreal light. Poirot stood by the balcony, the sea's whisper a reminder of time's passage, the ledger, the vial, the threat. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. Then a sound, a soft rustle from the gaming room. Poirot turned, his cane tapping softly. "Who is there?" he called, his voice steady but alert. Silence answered, but the air grew heavy with menace. The Ivory Casino was a labyrinth of lies, and the murderer was watching. As Poirot stepped back into the lounge, a shadow moved in the corridor, fleeting but real. The game was far from over, and the next move would be deadly. Chapter 4. The Hidden Ledger. The Ivory Casino, bathed in the pale glow of Monte Carlo's dawn, stood as a silent witness to the unraveling drama within its opulent walls. The Mediterranean's restless waves whispered secrets against the cliffs, but inside the air was thick with suspicion and the faint, lingering bitterness of arsenic. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the marble floor, stood in the velvet lounge, his green eyes sharp with purpose. The scream from the balcony, Marie Duval's collapse with a vial in hand, had sent ripples of panic through the suspects, and Poirot knew the murderer was tightening their noose. "This is no mere coincidence," he declared to Inspector Jacques Moreau, whose weary face betrayed the strain of the night. "The poisoner strikes again, to silence or to deceive." Moreau, his notebook bulging with hasty notes, rubbed his temples. "Monsieur Poirot, first Hawthorne, now Duval? Is this a spree or a desperate act?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a glint of determination in his gaze. "The little gray cells, they tell me this is a calculated move. We must follow the threads, beginning with the ledger." The ledger, recovered from Hawthorne's private office, was a tome of secrets, its pages filled with cryptic entries and torn stubs that hinted at financial misdeeds. Discovered behind a locked drawer, it bore Dr. Elias Thorne's signature on transactions funneling thousands to an anonymous account in Zurich. Poirot held the book under a candelabra's flickering light, his gloved fingers tracing the inked numbers. Embezzlement, perhaps, he mused, but by whom? And why hide it now? Poirot summoned the suspects back to the lounge, their faces a gallery of dread and defiance. Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, her emerald gown now wilted, sat with a rigid poise, her diamonds catching the light like accusations. Victor Langford, his cigarette smoke curling like a confession, leaned against a mirrored wall. Marie Duval, revived but pale, clutched a glass of water, her eyes darting nervously. Dr. Thorne adjusted his spectacles, his calm a brittle facade, while Count Dmitri Volkov stood apart, his Slavic intensity like a storm waiting to break. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice a velvet blade, the ledger reveals treachery, but the poison reveals intent. Mademoiselle Duval's collapse, was it suicide or a second murder attempt? He held up the vial from the balcony, its label smudged but suggestive of a sedative, not arsenic. Someone wished to silence her, or to cast suspicion elsewhere. Duval, her French accent wavering, spoke first. "I saw nothing, monsieur," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I felt ill, reached for my tonic, and then... darkness." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Your tonic, mademoiselle? Or a poison meant to mimic your distress?" He had learned of her thefts, jewels from the casino safe, and Hawthorne's threat to expose her. Was her collapse a performance to deflect guilt, or had she seen too much? Poirot noted. Staged? Dr. Thorne was next, his voice steady but strained. "The ledger is a fabrication," he protested, his spectacles glinting. "I managed accounts, yes, but these entries, someone forged my name." The sums, Poirot noted, were staggering, enough to ruin the casino if exposed. Thorne's motive, covering embezzlement, was potent, and his fingerprints on the poisoned flute were damning. "You had access to poisons, monsieur," Poirot said, "and opportunity." Thorne's face tightened. "I am a doctor, not a killer." Poirot scribbled cover-up. Lady Evelyn, under Poirot's gaze, faltered. A maid had seen her near the kitchen before the toast, where poisons might be concealed. "I was seeking a glass of water," she insisted, but her letters from a Parisian lover suggested a deeper motive. Escape from Hawthorne's control, and a fortune to fund it. "Madame, you stood to gain much," Poirot said softly. "Did you act to secure it?" Her eyes flashed with defiance. "I loved him once, but I am no murderess." Her alibi wavered, and Poirot wrote, "Freedom." Victor Langford, his desperation palpable, produced a receipt for his debts, claiming he had settled them. But Poirot spotted a flaw. The receipt was dated after the murder, and the forged gambling chip from Hawthorne's pile matched counterfeits found in Langford's coat. "You sought to expose him, perhaps?" Poirot queried. Langford's voice cracked. "I wanted justice, not blood." His proximity to the champagne tray lingered in Poirot's mind. Note, deception. Count Volkov, his dark eyes unreadable, admitted to a past swindle by Hawthorne that cost his family their estate. "Revenge is a cold dish," he said, his accent thick, "but I did not serve it." A search of his rooms yielded an empty vial, its shape akin to the one Duval held. "Planted!" Volkov thundered, his fists clenched. His absence during the toast remained unverified. Poirot's note. Vendetta. As the interrogations unfolded, Poirot returned to the gaming room where the table stood frozen in time. The forged chip nagged at him, a red herring or a clue to a larger scheme. He examined the flute's shards, noting the fingerprints. Hawthorne's, Duval's, Thorne's. The bottle was clean, meaning the poison was in the glass alone. But how? A sleight of hand during the toast, a distraction. A new clue surfaced, a suicide note found in Hawthorne's desk in his handwriting. The pressure, too much. it read, suggesting despair. But Poirot's keen eyes spotted fresh ink and subtle inconsistencies in the script, a forgery. Someone wished us to believe he took his own life, Poirot told Moreau. A clumsy deception. Duval, now steadier, whispered a revelation. She had overheard Thorne arguing with Hawthorne before the game, his voice low but venomous. He said, "You'll pay for this betrayal," she recounted. Thorne's face blanched when confronted. "A business dispute, nothing more," he insisted. But the ledger's entries suggested otherwise. Poirot's gray cells churned, weaving motives and clues. Thorne's embezzlement, Evelyn's affair, Langford's debts, Duval's thefts, Volkoff's revenge, each was a thread, but which led to murder. The vial from Duval's collapse hinted at a second attempt, but its mild contents suggested a ploy. The forged note pointed to desperation, the cufflink to misdirection. And the threat against Poirot? A sign the killer was watching. As night deepened, Poirot noticed a shadow moving toward the casino's vaults. Slipping through the darkened corridors, his cane silent, he followed. The vaults, a labyrinth of locked cabinets, held the casino's financial secrets. A figure, cloaked, swift, opened a safe, retrieving the ledger. Poirot stepped forward, his voice cutting through the gloom. "Bonsoir. You seek to hide the truth, non?" The figure froze, then fled, leaving the ledger behind. Poirot retrieved it, noting a torn page. Evidence removed. Back in the lounge, he confronted the suspects. "The ledger has been stolen, then returned," he announced, watching their faces. Thorne's eyes flickered, Evelyn's hands tightened. Langford's cigarette trembled, Duval gasped. Volkoff remained stone-faced. The missing page, Poirot deduced, held the key, perhaps a name, a sum, a secret. The stain on Volkoff's cuff returned to his mind. Champagne or poison residue? He requested a closer look, but Volkoff resisted, his voice icy. "You overstep, Belgian," Poirot smiled thinly. "The truth, it cares not for boundaries." As the suspects dispersed, Poirot lingered by the gaming table, reconstructing the toast. Thorne had leaned forward, adjusting the glass. Duval had poured. Langford was near the bar. Evelyn was absent, Volkoff missing. The forged chip, the note, the vial, all were distractions, but the ledger was real. Its numbers pointed to Thorne, but was he the sole culprit? A sound interrupted his thoughts, a soft creak from the vaults. Poirot moved swiftly, his senses alert. The door was ajar, a faint light within. He entered, finding the safe open, papers scattered. A figure had returned, but who? As he reached for a document, a shadow loomed behind him, and a cold breath grazed his neck. "Monsieur Poirot," a voice whispered, "you are too close." The detective turned, cane raised, but the figure vanished into the dark. The ledger's secrets were a siren's call, and the murderer was circling. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Chapter 5. Echoes of Betrayal. The Ivory Casino, its marble halls bathed in the wan light of a Monte Carlo dawn, seemed to hold its breath as the investigation into Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder deepened. The Mediterranean's ceaseless waves whispered against the cliffs, a restless counterpoint to the tension within, where the scent of arsenic and deceit lingered like a malevolent fog. Hercule Poirot, his egg-shaped head tilted in contemplation, stood in the casino's vaults, his gloved hands clutching the recovered ledger. The fleeting shadow that had whispered a warning, "You are too close," had vanished into the labyrinthine corridors, leaving only the echo of menace. Poirot's green eyes gleamed with resolve. "The murderer grows reckless," he murmured to Inspector Jacques Moreau, who stood nearby, his mustache twitching with frustration. "But recklessness, it reveals the truth." Moreau, his patience fraying, gestured to the ledger. "This book, Poirot. It points to Thorne. But now Duval's collapsed, the stolen page. It's a maze. Poirot's mustache curled slightly, a sign of his unyielding confidence. A maze, mon ami, but one with a path. The little gray cells, they see the pattern. The ledger's torn page, the forged gambling chip, the smudged vial, and the threatening note were pieces of a puzzle, but the shadowy figure in the vaults had raised the stakes. Poirot knew the killer was desperate, and desperation was a crack through which the light of truth could shine. The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, were summoned once more to the Velvet Lounge, where crimson drapes and gilded mirrors seemed to mock their strained facades. The candelabras flickered, casting shadows that danced like guilty secrets. Poirot, his notebook a silent witness, began his probing anew, his voice a blend of courtesy and steel. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the ledger has returned, but its secrets are not yet fully revealed. And Mademoiselle Duval's collapse, it is no accident. Someone seeks to silence or to deceive. Let us unravel these echoes of betrayal." Poirot turned first to Dr. Thorne, whose spectacles glinted with a nervous energy. The ledger's entries bearing his signature pointed to embezzlement, millions siphoned from the casino's coffers. But a new clue had emerged, a hidden partnership agreement found in Hawthorne's safe, stating that upon Hawthorne's death, Thorne would inherit controlling shares. "Monsieur," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "this agreement gives you motive beyond mere theft. Power, wealth. Did you poison to claim them?" Thorne's face tightened, his voice rising. "Preposterous! Reginald framed me to justify his own schemes." But his fingerprints on the poisoned flute and his access to arsenic as a doctor were damning. Poirot noted ambition. Lady Evelyn, her emerald gown now a shadow of its former elegance, faced Poirot with a mix of defiance and despair. The letters from her Parisian lover, discovered in her suite, had revealed her desperation to escape Hawthorne's control. But a new detail emerged, a telegram intercepted by Moreau's men confirming her lover's presence in Monte Carlo that night. "Madame," Poirot pressed, "you claim absence during the toast, yet your lover was here. Did you conspire?" Evelyn broke, tears streaming. "I loved him, yes, but I did not kill Reginald." She produced alibis, her lover's notes timed suspiciously close to the murder. Poirot's pencil scratched. Complicity. Victor Langford, his cigarette smoke curling like a confession, stood with shoulders slumped. His debts to Hawthorne, $50,000, were a noose around his neck, and witnesses had confirmed a public altercation days before. "I threatened him, yes," Langford admitted, his voice raw. "He cheated me, ruined me, but murder, I'm no fool." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Yet, monsieur, the forged chip in Hawthorne's pile matches those in your possession. A plan to expose him or to distract?" Langford's sweat beaded, his alibi of being at the bar weakening under scrutiny. Poirot wrote, "Vengeance?" Marie Duval, pale but defiant, clutched her water glass. Her recovery from the sedative-induced collapse swift but suspect. She accused Langford, her voice trembling. "I saw him near the champagne tray, tampering." Langford recoiled. "Lies! I was nowhere near." But Duval's own actions raised questions, her collapse, the vial, her whispered overhearing of Thorne's threat to Hawthorne. "You'll pay for this betrayal." Was she a victim or a cunning player? Poirot's note, manipulation. Count Volkov, his Slavic intensity like a coiled spring, spoke sparingly. A cryptic telegram found in his rooms, "The debt is settled," suggested a payoff. But from whom? "Hawthorne ruined my family," Volkov said, his voice low. "But I sought restitution, not blood." His absence during the toast remained unverified, and the vial in his rooms, though empty, hinted at involvement. Poirot scribbled, "Retribution," As Poirot pieced together the clues, a red herring surfaced, a missing kitchen knife reported by a chef suggesting a stabbing. But Hawthorne's autopsy showed only poison. A distraction, Poirot muttered, dismissing it. The forged suicide note with its fresh ink was another ploy, likely crafted to mislead, but the ledger's torn page nagged at him. Its absence pointed to a secret too dangerous to reveal. Poirot returned to the gaming room, reconstructing the fatal toast. Hawthorne at the head, Evelyn to his right, Langford opposite, Duval pouring, Thorne adjusting the glass, Volkov absent. The flute was poisoned, but the bottle clean. Thorne's touch was critical. Had he switched glasses? Duval's tray offered opportunity. Langford's proximity to the bar was suspicious. Evelyn's absence, Volkov's absence, gaps in the narrative. Then a breakthrough. Duval, under pressure, admitted hearing Thorne and Hawthorne argue fiercely hours before the game. He said, "You'll destroy me," she recounted. Thorne paled, claiming it was about finances, not murder, but the ledger's entries suggested otherwise. Millions moved, perhaps to cover Thorne's tracks. As suspicions mounted, Moreau, acting on the forged chip and Duval's accusation, moved to arrest Langford. "The evidence is clear," he declared. Poirot intervened, his voice sharp. "No, Inspector, it is too neat, too convenient. The true killer hides behind this chaos." Langford, released, glared at Duval, who shrank back. The lounge grew stifling, the suspects' glances darting like trapped animals. Poirot paced, his mind a whirl of motives. Thorne's ambition, Evelyn's affair, Langford's ruin, Duval's blackmail, Volkov's vendetta. The threatening note suggested a killer cornered, but the vault's shadow hinted at more. Poirot requested Volkov's cuff for inspection. The champagne stain might be poison residue, but Volkov refused, his eyes cold. "You push too far, Belgian." As night deepened, a gunshot rang out from Thorne's suite. Poirot and Moreau rushed in, finding the doctor slumped, blood seeping from a superficial wound to his shoulder. "It was her," he gasped, pointing weakly toward the door before collapsing. Moreau's men searched, finding no assailant, only an open window and a spent cartridge. Poirot knelt, examining the wound. "Self-inflicted," he murmured, noting powder burns. "Or a staged attack to divert us?" Thorne revived, insisted he was targeted. "She shot me! Evelyn!" Evelyn gasped, her hand to her chest. "Lies! I was in my room!" But her lover's presence in Monte Carlo, confirmed by the telegram, deepened her involvement. Had she conspired with Thorne only to betray him? Poirot returned to the ledger, its torn page a silent accusation. A smudged entry hinted at a Swiss account linked to Thorne but possibly others. The forged chip, the vial, the note, the cufflink, all were distractions, but the gunshot was a bold move. Was Thorne the mastermind or a pawn in a larger game? As the suspects dispersed, Poirot lingered in the lounge, the candelabras dimming. The sea's whisper grew louder, a reminder of time's passage. He reviewed his notes. Thorne's fingerprints, Evelyn's letters, Langford's forgeries, Duval's collapse, Volkov's telegram. Each was a thread, but the pattern was incomplete. The vault's shadow loomed in his mind. Someone had sought the ledger, someone feared its secrets. A soft creak interrupted his thoughts. The balcony door, ajar. Poirot stepped outside, the cool air sharp against his skin. A figure moved in the shadows, swift and silent. "Who is there?" he called, his cane raised. Silence answered, but a glint caught his eye. A dropped object, a small key gleaming in the moonlight. Poirot retrieved it, his mind racing. A key to what? The vault? A safe? The murderer's identity? The Ivory Casino was a labyrinth of lies, and the killer was circling closer. Poirot clutched the key, his gray cells humming. The gunshot, the ledger, the threat, all pointed to a desperate hand. But as he returned to the lounge, a chilling realization struck. The next move would be deadly, and the truth was tantalizingly close. The shadows whispered, and Poirot listened. Chapter 6. The Fractured Alibi. The Ivory Casino, its marble halls now cloaked in the muted glow of a Monte Carlo morning, stood as a silent sentinel over the unfolding drama of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder. The Mediterranean's restless waves beat against the cliffs below, their rhythm a stark contrast to the jagged tension within, where the air carried the faint tang of arsenic and the heavier weight of betrayal. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the hour, stood in the velvet lounge, the small key he had found on the balcony glinting in his gloved hand. The gunshot in Dr. Elias Thorne's suite, staged or genuine, had shattered the fragile calm, and the shadow in the vaults lingered in Poirot's mind like a spectre. "The murderer grows bold," he murmured to Inspector Jacques Moreau, whose weary eyes betrayed the strain of a sleepless night. "But boldness, it cracks the alibi." Moreau, his mustache drooping with exhaustion, clutched his notebook. "Poirot, this key, the gunshot, the ledger, it's chaos. Thorne claims he was shot, but by whom and why?" Poirot's green eyes twinkled with resolve. "The little gray cells, they see through the chaos, mon ami. The key, it unlocks more than a door, it unlocks the truth." The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, were summoned once more to the lounge, where crimson drapes and flickering candelabras cast an eerie glow. Their faces, etched with fatigue and fear, formed a gallery of guilt and defiance. Poirot, his notebook a silent witness, began his probing, his voice a velvet blade. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the gunshot was a diversion, the key a clue, but the alibis, they fracture under scrutiny. Let us see who crumbles." Dr. Thorne, his shoulder bandaged, sat with a strained composure, his spectacles glinting. The gunshot wound, Poirot had deduced, was superficial, with powder burns suggesting a self-inflicted act. "Monsieur," Poirot said, his tone deceptively mild, "you claim an attack, yet the evidence suggests a performance. To divert suspicion, no?" Thorne's face tightened. "I was shot, I tell you, by her." He pointed at Lady Evelyn, who gasped, her diamonds trembling. Poirot noted the powder burns, the angle of the wound, too precise for a struggle. His note, staged. Lady Evelyn, her emerald gown now creased, faced Poirot with a mix of indignation and despair. Her alibi, fetching a shawl during the toast, had crumbled when a maid, under pressure, admitted to being bribed to lie. "I was in my room," Evelyn insisted, but the telegram from her Parisian lover confirming his presence in Monte Carlo deepened her motive. "Madame," Poirot pressed, "your lover was here and the ledger was found in your luggage. Did you hide it to protect him? Or yourself?" Evelyn's eyes welled. "I hid it to save Reginald's reputation, not to kill." But the key, Poirot suspected, might fit her suite safe. Note, conspiracy. Victor Langford, his cigarette now a stub, admitted to forging gambling chips to trap Hawthorne, not to murder. "I wanted to ruin him as he ruined me," he said, his voice raw. The forged chip in Hawthorne's pile matched those in his coat, but his alibi, being at the bar, held under scrutiny from a reluctant waiter. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "your vengeance is clear, but did it extend to poison?" Langford's sweat beaded. "I'm no killer." Poirot wrote, "Distraction." Marie Duval, her recovery from the sedative swift but suspect, accused Volkov, claiming she saw him near the champagne tray. "He had a vial, monsieur," she whispered, her French accent thick with fear. But her own collapse, Poirot noted, was theatrical, perhaps self-administered to deflect suspicion. "Mademoiselle, you play the victim well," he said, "but what did you truly see?" Duval faltered, admitting only to overhearing Thorne's threat to Hawthorne. Note: manipulation. Count Volkov, his Slavic intensity like a storm cloud, produced a telegram. The debt is settled, traced to a Swiss bank linked to Hawthorne's accounts. A payment, not a murder, he insisted, his voice low. The vial in his rooms, empty but damning, was dismissed as planted. His absence during the toast remained unverified, but a mistress in Nice confirmed his presence later that night. Poirot's note: alibi. The key, small and ornate, nagged at Poirot. He tested it in the casino's vaults, finding it fit a secondary safe, but it was empty. Another distraction? Returning to the gaming room, he reconstructed the toast. Hawthorne at the head, Evelyn to his right, Langford opposite, Duval pouring. Thorne adjusting the glass, Volkov absent. The flute's fingerprints, Hawthorne's, Duval's, Thorne's, pointed to opportunity, but the ledger's torn page suggested a deeper secret. A new clue emerged: arsenic traces in Thorne's medical bag discovered by Moreau's men. "You are a doctor, monsieur," Poirot said, "with poisons at your disposal." Thorne paled. "I treat ailments, not cause them." But the ledger's entries, his fingerprints, and the partnership agreement painted a motive of greed and power. Poirot pressed, "Did you poison to secure the casino?" Thorne's denial was fervent, but his eyes betrayed unease. Evelyn's involvement deepened when Poirot found the ledger in her luggage, hidden beneath silk scarves. "Why, madam?" he demanded. She faltered. "To protect us all. The casino's reputation, my future." But the torn page, Poirot suspected, held a name. Hers or Thorne's. He noted, "cover-up." Langford's forgeries, Poirot deduced, were a red herring, meant to expose Hawthorne's cheating but unrelated to murder. Duval's collapse, with its mild sedative, was likely self-inflicted, a ploy to shift blame. Volkov's telegram suggested a payoff, possibly from Thorne to silence him about the embezzlement. As the lounge grew stifling, a storm brewed outside, its thunder echoing the turmoil within. Poirot paced, his mind a whirl of clues: the key, the gunshot, the ledger, the vial. The threatening note, "Cease your meddling," pointed to a killer cornered. But the shadow in the vault suggested another layer. Suddenly the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. A crash echoed. A chair overturned. When the lights returned, Volkov was gone, his coat left behind. Moreau's men searched, finding no trace. "Fled," Moreau exclaimed. Poirot shook his head. "None, Inspector. He is either a fugitive or a victim." He examined Volkov's coat, noting the champagne stain on the cuff, now confirmed as arsenic residue by a chemist summoned by Moreau. Had Volkov handled the poison, or was it planted? The key, Poirot realized, might fit Volkov's suite, where more evidence could hide. Poirot moved swiftly, entering Volkov's rooms with Moreau. The search yielded a hidden compartment in a cigar box containing a coded note. "Payment secured. E.T. to settle." E.T. Thorne? The note suggested a deal, but for what? Silence? Or murder? Poirot's gray cells churned, connecting the dots. Thorne's fingerprints, the ledger's entries, the partnership agreement, the arsenic traces. Returning to the lounge, Poirot confronted Thorne. "Monsieur, your alibis fracture. The gunshot, the arsenic, the ledger, all point to you." Thorne's composure cracked. "I'm innocent. Someone framed me." But the coded note, the key, and the stain tightened the noose. Evelyn, trembling, admitted to hiding the ledger, but swore ignorance of murder. "I thought it was about the affair," she whispered. Langford, cleared of poisoning, glared at Duval, who shrank back. Duval, pressed, admitted staging her collapse to avoid suspicion. "I was scared," she said, tears welling. As the storm raged, Poirot stood by the gaming table reconstructing the fatal moment. Thorne's hand on the flute, Duval's tray, Langford's proximity, Evelyn's absence, Volkov's disappearance. The key, he suspected, fit a safe in Evelyn's suite, where more of the ledger's pages might hide. He moved to search, but a sound, a soft footstep in the corridor, halted him. "Who is there?" he called, cane raised. Silence answered, but the air grew heavy with menace. Poirot clutched the key, his mind racing. The gunshot was a ploy, the ledger a map, the note a warning. Volkov's absence was troubling. Was he the killer, or had he fled a threat? The arsenic on his cuff, the coded note, the missing page, all pointed to a conspiracy, but whose? Thorne's ambition, Evelyn's desperation, Duval's deceit, Langford's revenge, Volkov's vendetta. Each was a thread, but the pattern was elusive. As he stepped into the corridor, a shadow flickered, swift and silent. Poirot's heart quickened, but he pressed forward, the key a talisman. The Ivory Casino was a labyrinth of lies, and the murderer was close, too close. The next move, Poirot knew, would be a gambit, and the truth hung in the balance. The storm's thunder roared, and the game tightened. Chapter 7. Veils of Deception. The Ivory Casino, its opulent halls now shrouded in the gray light of a Monte Carlo morning, seemed to pulse with the weight of its secrets. The Mediterranean's waves crashed relentlessly against the cliffs, their rhythm a grim underscore to the storm brewing within, where the scent of arsenic and betrayal hung heavy. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the marble floor, stood in the darkened corridor, the small key from the balcony clutched in his gloved hand. Count Dmitri Volkov's sudden disappearance, the arsenic-stained cuff and the coded note, payment secured, E.T. to settle, had tightened the web of suspicion. The gunshot in Dr. Elias Thorne's suite, likely staged, was a desperate ploy, and Poirot's gray cells hummed with the certainty that the murderer was cornered. "The veils of deception," he murmured to Inspector Jacques Moreau, who stood nearby, his face etched with exhaustion. "They are lifting, mon ami." Moreau, his notebook nearly full, rubbed his eyes. "Poirot, Volkov's gone, Thorne's wounded, the ledger's a maze. Where does it end?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a spark of triumph in his gaze. "It ends, Inspector, when the truth is laid bare. The key, the note, the stain. They are the threads we must follow." Poirot led Moreau to the cliffs, where a sea breeze carried the scent of salt and menace. Volkov, found hiding among the rocks, held a pistol, his dark eyes blazing. "You meddle too much, Belgian," he snarled, his Slavic accent thick. Poirot, unflinched, raised a hand. "Monsieur, your flight suggests guilt, but your eyes speak of fear. Lower the weapon and let us talk." Volkov hesitated, then complied, his shoulders slumping. "Hawthorne ruined my family," he confessed, "but I sought only restitution, not death." The telegram, the debt, is settled, was payment from Thorne, he claimed, to silence his knowledge of embezzlement. "I am no murderer," Volkov insisted, the arsenic on his cuff a plant, he swore. Poirot noted. "Pawn?" Back in the velvet lounge, Poirot reconvened the suspects: Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and now Volkov, his presence a storm cloud. The candelabras flickered, casting shadows that seemed to whisper accusations. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot announced, his voice a velvet blade. "The alibis fracture, the clues align. A murderer among you weaves a tapestry of lies, but the little gray cells see through." Thorne, his bandaged shoulder a theatrical prop, faced Poirot's scrutiny. The gunshot, confirmed self-inflicted by powder burns, was a ploy to deflect suspicion. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "your wound is a lie, as is your innocence. The ledger, The arsenic in your bag, your fingerprints on the flute, they accuse you. Thorne's spectacles glinted, his voice rising. I'm framed. Hawthorne was the thief. But the coded note, E.T. to settle, pointed to him, and the partnership agreement, granting him control upon Hawthorne's death, sealed his motive. Poirot wrote, Mastermind. Lady Evelyn, her composure cracking, admitted to hiding the ledger in her luggage. I thought it protected Reginald's name, she whispered, tears streaming. But a shocking revelation emerged. The diamond cufflink marked E.T. was not Thorne's, but a gift from Evelyn to her lover, Thorne himself. An affair? Poirot exclaimed, his eyes piercing. Evelyn nodded, broken. We planned to leave, but not to kill. The key, Poirot discovered, fit a safe in her suite, containing love letters and a draft of the ledger's missing page implicating Thorne. Motive: love and wealth. Note: accomplice. Victor Langford, cleared of poisoning but guilty of forgery, slumped in defeat. I forged the chips to expose Hawthorne's cheating, he admitted, not to murder. His alibi held, confirmed by a waiter who saw him at the bar. Poirot dismissed him as a distraction, noting, irrelevant. Marie Duval, her collapse a confirmed ruse with a mild sedative, accused Volkov to deflect blame. I saw him with a vial, she insisted, but Poirot's probing revealed her fear of exposure for thefts. Mademoiselle, your performance was clever, he said, but your guilt is petty. Her overhearing of Thorne's threat, you'll pay for this betrayal, was true, but her role was minor. Note: diversion. Volkov, reinstated, produced his mistress's testimony, placing him in Nice post-murder. The arsenic on his cuff, Poirot deduced, was transferred during a scuffle with Thorne before the game, confirmed by a waiter's account. You were used, monsieur, Poirot said, to muddy the waters. Note: exonerated. The ledger's missing page, reconstructed from Evelyn's safe, revealed Thorne's embezzlement, millions funneled to a Swiss account. But a twist. Entries suggested Hawthorne knew, planning to expose Thorne, not frame him. The game was reversed, Poirot murmured, piecing it together. The forged suicide note, its ink matching Thorne's pen, was his creation, meant to mislead. The cufflink planted to implicate Volkov was another of Thorne's ruses. As accusations flew, Poirot gathered the suspects around the gaming table, recreating the fatal toast. Thorne leaned forward, adjusting the glass, he said, pointing. The poison was in the flute, not the bottle, his fingerprints confirm. Duval poured, but Thorne's touch was the key. Langford was at the bar. Evelyn absent. Volkov gone. The arsenic, sourced from Thorne's medical bag, was administered with surgical precision. But a new clue surfaced. A witness, a croupier, saw Thorne and Evelyn whispering hours before the game, their faces tense. A conspiracy? Poirot wondered. Evelyn admitted to planning an escape with Thorne, but swore ignorance of murder. He said it was for us, she whispered, implicating Thorne further. As the storm outside raged, its thunder echoing the turmoil, Poirot pressed Thorne. Your motive, greed, power, love, your opportunity, unmatched. Confess, monsieur. Thorne's composure shattered, his voice a snarl. Hawthorne would have ruined me. He deserved it. But he stopped short of a full confession, his eyes darting to Evelyn. Suddenly, Duval collapsed again, clutching her throat, a new vial in her hand. Thorne, she gasped before fainting. Moreau's men rushed her to a doctor, confirming another sedative, not poison. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Another performance or a warning? He examined the vial, its label identical to the first. Thorne's medical supply? The lounge grew stifling, the suspects' faces pale. Poirot paced, his mind a whirl of clues. The key, the ledger, the note, the cufflink, the gunshot, the stain. Thorne's fingerprints, his arsenic, his affair with Evelyn, all pointed to him. But Evelyn's complicity nagged. Had she known of the poison? The coded note suggested a deal, but with whom? Volkov was clear, Langford irrelevant, Duval manipulative. Thorne and Evelyn were the core. As the storm's lightning illuminated the room, Poirot found a final clue. A torn receipt in Thorne's pocket matching the Swiss account. "You moved the money," Poirot said, "and killed to hide it." Thorne lunged for the door, but Moreau's men seized him. "Lies!" he shouted, but his defiance wavered. Evelyn wept, her role unclear, lover or conspirator. Poirot turned to her. "Madame, did you know?" She shook her head, but her eyes betrayed doubt. The key, the ledger, the affair, all intertwined. Volkov, watching, spoke softly. "The Belgian sees all." Langford, relieved, lit another cigarette. Duval, revived, shrank back, her ruse exposed. Poirot stood by the gaming table, the scene frozen in his mind. The flute, the arsenic, the ledger. Thorne's hand was clear. But a shadow lingered. Was Evelyn innocent, or had she played a part? The storm roared, and a distant sound, a footstep, echoed from the vaults. Poirot's cane tapped softly, his senses alert. "The truth is near," he whispered, "but the game is not over." The Ivory Casino was a labyrinth of veils, and the murderer's hand was trembling. Poirot clutched the key, his gray cells racing. The next move would be decisive, and the final revelation loomed. As lightning flashed, a shadow moved in the corridor, swift and silent. The hunt tightened, and the truth beckoned. Chapter 8. Threads unraveled. The Ivory Casino, its marble corridors steeped in the muted glow of a Monte Carlo morning, stood as a grand mausoleum of secrets, its opulence mocked by the grim reality of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder. The Mediterranean's waves pounded the cliffs below, their relentless rhythm a counterpoint to the storm of suspicion within, where the air carried the faint bitterness of arsenic and the heavier weight of deceit. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the hour, stood in the velvet lounge, the small key from the balcony and the torn receipt from Dr. Elias Thorne's pocket clutched in his gloved hands. Marie Duval's second collapse, another staged act with a sedative, had tightened the web, and Count Dmitri Volkov's return had dispelled one shadow only to cast another. "The threads, they unravel," Poirot murmured to Inspector Jacques Moreau, whose exhausted eyes betrayed the strain of the case. "The murderer's hand trembles, mon ami, and the truth emerges." Moreau, his mustache sagging, clutched his overflowing notebook. Poirot, Thorne's wound, Duval's theatrics, Volkov's flight. It's a circus. The ledger, the key, the note. Where do they lead? Poirot's green eyes sparkled with certainty. "To the heart of the crime, Inspector, the little gray cells, they see the pattern, and the veils of deception are falling." The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, were gathered once more in the lounge, where crimson drapes and flickering candelabras cast eerie shadows. Their faces, etched with fatigue, fear, and defiance, formed a tableau of guilt and desperation. Poirot, his notebook a silent arbiter, began his probing, his voice a blend of courtesy and steel. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the alibis have fractured, the clues converge. A murderer among you weaves lies, but the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot." Duval, pale but defiant, spoke first, her French accent thick. "It was Thorne," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I saw him spike the champagne flute before the toast." Her collapse, she admitted, was a ruse to deflect suspicion, but her claim against Thorne carried weight. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Mademoiselle, your performance was clever, but your testimony, how true?" He noted her access to the tray, her thefts, her fear of exposure, but her accusation aligned with the evidence. Note: witness. Thorn, his bandaged shoulder a fading prop, faced Poirot with a brittle calm. The gunshot, confirmed self-inflicted, was a desperate act, and the arsenic in his medical bag, the fingerprints on the flute, and the ledger's entries painted a damning picture. "Monsieur," Poirot said, "your motive, greed, power, love, is clear. The coded note, ET to settle on, and the receipt to a Swiss account. They accuse you." Thorn's spectacles glinted, his voice rising. "Lies! Hawthorne framed me to ruin me." But the partnership agreement, granting him control upon Hawthorne's death, and the affair with Evelyn tightened the noose. Poirot wrote, "Culprit." Lady Evelyn, her emerald gown a shadow of its former glory, wept openly, her diamonds trembling. The cufflink, a gift to Thorn, her lover, had been planted to implicate Volkov, she confessed. "I hid the ledger to protect Elias," she said, "but I swear I didn't know he'd kill." The key from the balcony fit her suite safe, where the ledger's missing page revealed Thorn's embezzlement and her complicity in hiding it. "Madame," Poirot pressed, "did you know of the poison?" Evelyn shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I loved him. I thought we'd escape, not murder." Note, accomplice? Victor Langford, cleared of poisoning but guilty of forging chips, stood with shoulders slumped. "I wanted to expose Hawthorne's cheating," he admitted, his cigarette smoke curling. His alibi, confirmed by a waiter at the bar, held firm, and the forged chip was a red herring unrelated to murder. Poirot dismissed him, noting, "Exonerated." Volkov, his Slavic intensity softened by vindication, produced his mistress's testimony, placing him in Nice post-murder. The arsenic on his cuff, Poirot confirmed, was transferred during a scuffle with Thorn before the game, a waiter's account corroborating. "You were a pawn, monsieur," Poirot said, "used to cloud the truth." The telegram, "The debt is settled," was Thorn's payment to silence Volkov's knowledge of the embezzlement. Note, cleared. Poirot returned to the gaming room, the scene frozen in his mind. Hawthorne at the head, Evelyn to his right, Langford opposite, Duval pouring, Thorn adjusting the flute, Volkov absent. The fingerprints, Hawthorne's, Duval's, Thorn's, pointed to Thorn's opportunity. The arsenic sourced from his bag was administered with precision. The forged suicide note, its ink matching Thorn's pen, was his creation, meant to mislead. The cufflink, a deliberate misdirection aimed at Volkov. But a new clue emerged. A croupier's testimony overheard by Moreau's men placed Thorn and Evelyn in a heated exchange hours before the game, discussing a final solution. A plan to kill? Poirot wondered. Evelyn, confronted, admitted to plotting an escape with Thorn but swore ignorance of murder. "He said it was for our future," she whispered, her voice breaking. Poirot paced, his gray cells weaving the threads. The key, the ledger, the note, the cufflink, the gunshot, the stain, the receipt. Thorn's fingerprints, his arsenic, his affair, his embezzlement, all converged. But Evelyn's role nagged. Was she unwitting or complicit? The coded note suggested a deal, but Duval's testimony sealed Thorn's guilt. The storm outside roared, its lightning illuminating the lounge, mirroring the clarity dawning in Poirot's mind. He gathered the suspects around the gaming table, recreating the fatal toast. Thorn leaned forward, he said, pointing, adjusting the flute, his moment to spike it. The bottle was clean, the poison was in the glass alone. Duval poured, unaware. Langford was at the bar, Evelyn absent, Volkov gone. The fingerprints, the arsenic, the ledger, they accuse one man. Thorn lunged for the door, his face a mask of panic. "You have no proof," he shouted, but Moreau's men seized him. Poirot held up the receipt, the coded note, the ledger's page. "Your greed, monsieur, your love, your desperation, they betray you. The flute was your weapon, the casino your prize." Thorn snarled, his defiance crumbling. "Hawthorne would have exposed me, or ruined us both." His partial confession hung in the air, but Poirot sensed more. Evelyn, trembling, clutched her handkerchief. "I didn't know," she insisted, but her eyes flickered with guilt. Poirot pressed. "Madame, you hid the ledger, you gave the cufflink. Did you know his plan?" She shook her head, but the key's fit in her safe suggested deeper involvement. Was she a pawn or a player? Duval, her ruse exposed, shrank back, her role minor but manipulative. Langford, relieved, lit another cigarette, his vengeance irrelevant. Volkov, exonerated, watched with cold detachment, his vendetta resolved by truth. The storm's thunder echoed, a drum roll for the climax. Poirot stood by the table, the flute's shards a silent witness. The forged note, the cufflink, the vial, all were Thorne's distractions. The ledger's entries, the receipt, the arsenic, they were his downfall. But a shadow lingered, Evelyn's complicity. Had she supplied the poison or merely hidden the evidence? The key, Poirot realized, might unlock one final secret, a safe in Thorne's suite, perhaps. As he moved to search, a sound, a soft creak from the corridor, halted him. "Who is there?" he called, cane raised. Silence answered, but the air grew heavy with menace. Poirot clutched the key, his mind racing. The receipt, the note, the ledger, all pointed to Thorne, but Evelyn's tears suggested a shared guilt. The storm's lightning flashed, and a shadow moved, swift and silent. Poirot stepped into the corridor, his senses alert. The casino was a labyrinth of lies, and the murderer's hand was desperate. The key, the receipt, the arsenic, they were the final threads, but one piece remained. As he approached Thorne's suite, a faint light glowed within, and a rustle hinted at presence. The truth was close, but the danger closer. The game, Poirot knew, was nearing its end. Chapter 9. The penultimate gambit. The Ivory Casino, its marble halls steeped in the pale light of a Monte Carlo morning, stood as a grand stage for the unraveling of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder. The Mediterranean's waves crashed against the cliffs below, their relentless rhythm a stark counterpoint to the electric tension within, where the air carried the bitter trace of arsenic and the heavier weight of betrayal. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming, stood in the velvet lounge, the small key from the balcony and the torn receipt from Dr. Elias Thorne's pocket clutched in his gloved hands. The shadow in the corridor, the coded note, E.T. to settle, and Marie Duval's staged collapse had tightened the web of suspicion, and Poirot's gray cells hummed with the certainty that the truth was within reach. "The penultimate gambit," he murmured to Inspector Jacques Moreau, whose haggard face betrayed the strain of the case. "The murderer plays their final card, mon ami. But the little gray cells, they hold the trump." Moreau, his notebook brimming, rubbed his temples. Poirot, Thorne's confession, Evelyn's tears, Volkov's return, it's a tangle. The key, the receipt, the ledger. Where does it end? Poirot's green eyes sparkled with resolve. "It ends, Inspector, when the final veil falls. The truth, it is close, but the danger closer." The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, were gathered once more in the lounge, where crimson drapes and flickering candelabras cast a spectral glow. Their faces, etched with exhaustion, fear, and defiance, formed a tableau of guilt and desperation. Poirot, his notebook a silent arbiter, began his probing, his voice a velvet blade. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the alibis are shattered, the clues converge. The murderer's hand trembles, but Hercule Poirot sees through the deception." Thorne, his bandaged shoulder a fading ruse, sat with a brittle calm, his spectacles glinting. His partial confession, "Hawthorne would have ruined me," hung in the air, but Poirot pressed for more. "Monsieur," he said, "your fingerprints on the flute, the arsenic in your bag, the receipt to a Swiss account, the coded note, they accuse you. You poisoned to secure the casino, non? Thorne's face tightened, his voice a snarl. He was a thief. He framed me. But the ledger's entries, the partnership agreement granting him control in his affair with Evelyn, painted a motive of greed and love. The receipt found in his pocket matched the Swiss account in the ledger. Poirot wrote, "Guilty." Lady Evelyn, her emerald gown a wilted relic, wept openly, her diamonds trembling. The cufflink, a gift to Thorne, was her mistake, planted to implicate Volkov. "I hid the ledger to protect Elias," she confessed, "but I didn't know he'd kill." The key from the balcony fit her suite safe, where the ledger's missing page implicated Thorne and suggested her complicity. "Madame," Poirot pressed, "did you supply the poison?" Evelyn shook her head, her eyes haunted. "I wanted freedom, not death, but a witness, a maid," confirmed Evelyn and Thorne, whispering about a final act before the game. Note: complicit. Victor Langford, cleared of poisoning, stood with shoulders slumped, his cigarette smoke curling. His forged chips were a revenge plot unrelated to murder. "I wanted to ruin Hawthorne, not kill him," he admitted. His alibi, confirmed by a waiter, held firm. Poirot dismissed him, noting, "Exonerated." Marie Duval, her theatrical collapse exposed as a sedative-induced ruse, accused Thorne with renewed vigor. "I saw him spike the flute," she insisted, her French accent thick. Her role as a thief was minor, her collapse a ploy to deflect suspicion. But her testimony, Poirot noted, aligned with the fingerprints. "Mademoiselle, you play the victim well," he said, "but your truth strengthens the case." Note: witness. Volkov, his Slavic intensity softened by vindication, produced his mistress's testimony, placing him in Nice post-murder. The arsenic on his cuff, transferred during a scuffle with Thorne, was confirmed by a waiter. The telegram, "The debt is settled," was Thorne's payment to silence Volkov's knowledge of the embezzlement. "You were used, monsieur," Poirot said, "to cloud the truth." Note: cleared. Poirot returned to the gaming room, the scene etched in his mind. Hawthorne at the head, Evelyn to his right, Langford opposite, Duval pouring, Thorne adjusting the flute, Volkov absent. The fingerprints, Hawthorne's, Duval's, Thorne's, pointed to Thorne's opportunity. The arsenic from his medical bag was administered with precision. The forged suicide note, its ink matching Thorne's pen, was his creation. The cufflink planted to frame Volkov was Evelyn's error. But a twist emerged. The ledger's missing page found in Evelyn's safe suggested Hawthorne had discovered Thorne's embezzlement and planned to expose him, not frame him. "The game was reversed," Poirot murmured. Thorne had forged the ledger's entries to implicate Hawthorne, justifying murder to protect his thefts and affair. The receipt confirmed millions moved to Switzerland under Thorne's control. Poirot confronted Thorne, holding up the receipt. "You stole, monsieur, and killed to hide it. The partnership agreement was your prize." Thorne's defiance cracked. "He would have destroyed me." "And Evelyn." His confession deepened, but Poirot sensed a gap. Evelyn's role. Had she known? Evelyn, pressed, admitted to planning an escape with Thorne. "He said it was for us," she whispered, "but I didn't know he'd kill." The maid's testimony, whispers of a final act, suggested knowledge, but her tears seemed genuine. Poirot's note, unwitting. Duval's accusation sealed Thorne's guilt, but Poirot probed deeper. "Mademoiselle, you saw him spike the flute. When?" Duval faltered. "Before the toast, as he adjusted it." The timing matched Thorne's opportunity, confirmed by the fingerprints. But a new clue surfaced. A torn page from the ledger found in Thorne's pocket with his handwritten annotations, proof of his tampering. "The poison was meant for Hawthorne," Poirot declared, "but was there another target?" A chilling thought struck. Had Thorne intended to poison Langford, whose debts threatened exposure, only for the flute to reach Hawthorne by mistake? Non, Poirot corrected himself, then the precision was too great. The flute was Hawthorne's, the act deliberate. As the storm outside raged, its thunder echoing the turmoil, Poirot gathered the suspects around the gaming table. Thorne's hand spiked the flute, he said, pointing. His motive, greed, power, love, his opportunity, unmatched. The receipt, the ledger, the arsenic, the note, all converged. Thorne lunged again, but Moreau's men held him. "Admit it all," Poirot demanded. Thorne crumbled, his voice a rasp. He deserved it, for everything. But a shadow lingered, Evelyn's complicity. Poirot turned to her. "Madame, you hid the ledger, you loved him, did you know?" Evelyn's tears fell, but her silence spoke volumes. The key, Poirot realized, might fit a safe in Thorne's suite, holding the final piece. A confession, perhaps? As he moved to search, a gunshot echoed from outside, not the storm, but a real shot. Moreau's men rushed out, finding only fireworks from a nearby fete, a cruel echo. Poirot's heart quickened, his senses alert. "A diversion," he murmured, clutching the key. The lounge grew stifling, the suspects' faces pale. Poirot stood by the table, the flute's shards a silent witness. Thorne's guilt was clear, but Evelyn's role nagged. The receipt, the ledger, the note, the cufflink, the arsenic, all pointed to Thorne, but Evelyn's safe held the keys secret. Volkov watched, cleared but wary. Langford, irrelevant, smoked in silence. Duval, her ruse exposed, shrank back. A sound, a rustle from the corridor, halted Poirot. "Who is there?" he called, cane raised. Silence answered, but the air grew heavy with menace. Poirot stepped forward, the key a talisman. The casino was a labyrinth of lies, and the murderer's hand was desperate. The fireworks' glow illuminated a shadow, swift and silent. The truth was near, but the final gambit loomed. Chapter 10. The Grand Revelation. The Ivory Casino, its marble halls bathed in the pale, unforgiving light of a Monte Carlo morning, stood as a silent witness to the culmination of Sir Reginald Hawthorne's murder. The Mediterranean's waves crashed relentlessly against the cliffs, their rhythm a grim drum roll for the final act, where the air was thick with the bitter trace of arsenic and the heavier weight of unveiled truths. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes gleaming, stood in the velvet lounge, the small key from the balcony and the torn receipt from Dr. Elias Thorne's pocket clutched in his gloved hands. The fireworks' false gunshot had been a fleeting distraction, but the web of clues, the ledger, the coded note, the arsenic-stained cuff, the forged chip, had tightened around the murderer. "The grand revelation," Poirot murmured to Inspector Jacques Moreau, whose haggard face reflected the case's toll. "The truth, mon ami, it shines like the sun." Moreau, his notebook brimming, rubbed his eyes. "Poirot, Thorne's confession, Evelyn's tears, the key, it's all pointing one way, but is it certain?" Poirot's green eyes sparkled with certainty, his mustache twitching with triumph. "The little gray cells, they do not err. The murderer's hand is revealed, and justice, she awaits." The suspects, Lady Evelyn Hawthorne, Victor Langford, Marie Duval, Dr. Elias Thorne, and Count Dmitri Volkov, were gathered one final time around the gaming table in the sealed room where Hawthorne had fallen. The crimson drapes and flickering candelabras cast a spectral glow, their faces a gallery of dread, relief, and defeat. Poirot, his notebook closed, stood at the head, his voice a velvet blade cutting through the tension. "Mesdames et messieurs," he announced, "the game is over. The murderer of Sir Reginald Hawthorne stands among you, but the veils of deception are lifted. Let us reveal the truth." Poirot began with the scene, his hands gesturing to the table frozen in time. Scattered cards, shattered flute, and the ghost of Hawthorne's final gasp. The poison arsenic was in the champagne flute, not the bottle, he said, his voice steady. A precise act requiring opportunity, motive, and nerve. Each of you had reason, but only one had the means. He turned to Victor Langford, his cigarette smoke curling like a fading grudge. Monsieur Langford, your forged chips were a plot to expose Hawthorne's cheating, not to kill. Your alibi at the bar, confirmed by a waiter, clears you. Langford exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. I told you I'm no murderer. Poirot nodded, dismissing him. Note: exonerated. Count Volkov, his Slavic intensity softened by vindication, stood tall. Monsieur Volkov, Poirot said, your vendetta was real. But your absence during the toast, verified by your mistress and niece, clears you. The arsenic on your cuff, transferred in a scuffle with the true culprit, was a misdirection. Volkov's eyes gleamed with gratitude. You see truth, Belgian. Note: cleared. Marie Duval, her French accent subdued, shrank under Poirot's gaze. Mademoiselle Duval, your thefts were petty. Your collapse a staged act with a sedative to deflect suspicion. But your testimony, seeing the flute spiked, was true. Duval nodded, tears welling. I was scared, monsieur. Her role was minor, her accusation pivotal. Note: witness. Lady Evelyn, her emerald gown a wilted relic, wept openly, her diamonds trembling. Madame, Poirot said, his tone gentle but firm. Your affair with Dr. Thorne, your hidden ledger, your cufflink gift, they suggest complicity. The key from the balcony fit your safe, revealing the ledger's page. Did you know of the poison? Evelyn shook her head, her voice breaking. I loved Elias, but I swear I didn't know he'd kill. A maid's testimony, whispers of a final act, hinted at knowledge, but her tears seemed genuine. Poirot's note: unwitting. Dr. Thorne, his bandaged shoulder a failed ruse, faced Poirot with a brittle defiance, his spectacles glinting. Monsieur Thorne, Poirot declared, you are the murderer. Your motive, greed, power, love. Your opportunity, unmatched. Your fingerprints on the flute, the arsenic in your bag, the receipt to a Swiss account, the coded note, E.T. to settle. They accuse you. Thorne's face contorted, his voice a snarl. You have no proof. But Poirot held up the torn ledger page, its annotations in Thorne's hand, detailing millions embezzled. You killed to hide your thefts and secure the casino, Poirot said, and to protect your affair with Madame Evelyn. Poirot reconstructed the crime, his hands tracing the fatal moment. You leaned forward, adjusting Hawthorne's flute, spiking it with arsenic from your medical bag. The bottle was clean. The poison was in the glass alone. Mademoiselle Duval poured, unaware. Monsieur Langford was at the bar. Madame Evelyn absent, Monsieur Volkov gone. Your fingerprints confirm your act. The forged suicide note, its ink matching Thorne's pen, was his creation to mislead. The cufflink planted to frame Volkov was Evelyn's gift, a misstep. The coded note and receipt tied Thorne to the Swiss account, his embezzlement exposed. Red herrings unraveled. The forged chip was Langford's revenge, irrelevant to murder. Duval's collapse, self-inflicted with a sedative, was a ploy to shift blame. The missing kitchen knife, a false clue, suggested a stabbing that never occurred. The threatening note, "Cease your meddling," was Thorne's warning scrawled in haste. The gunshot in his suite, self-inflicted, was a desperate act to deflect suspicion. Poirot turned to Evelyn, his gaze piercing. Madame, you hid the ledger to protect your lover, but did you know his plan? Evelyn's tears fell, her voice a whisper. I thought we'd escape. I didn't know he'd kill. A croupier's testimony, Thorne and Evelyn's whispers of a final solution, suggested complicity, but her shock at the murder seemed genuine. Poirot deduced she was unwitting, manipulated by Thorne's promises. Thorne's defiance crumbled as Poirot presented the final clue. The key, fitting a safe in Thorne's suite, revealed a hidden diary. Its pages in Thorne's hand detailed his plan. Poison Hawthorne to hide the embezzlement and secure the casino, with Evelyn as his unwitting shield. "You used her love," Poirot said, "to cloak your crime." Thorne's shoulders slumped, his voice a rasp. "He would have destroyed us. The casino, our future, I had no choice." Moreau's men moved to cuff Thorne, but Poirot held up a hand. "One moment, Inspector, let us clarify." He turned to the group, his voice resonant. The crime was precise. Arsenic in the flute administered by Thorne during the toast. His motive, greed for the casino, fear of exposure, love for Madame Evelyn. The ledger's entries, his fingerprints, the diary, they leave no doubt. The cufflink, the note, the gunshot, they were his deceptions meant to cloud the truth. Evelyn wept, her role as an unwitting accomplice clear. "I trusted him," she whispered. Langford cleared, lit another cigarette, his vengeance irrelevant. Duval, her ruse exposed, sank into a chair, her thefts trivial. Volkov, exonerated, nodded with respect. "You see all, Belgian." Poirot stood by the gaming table, the flute's shards a silent testament. The storm outside had calmed, its thunder replaced by the sea's whisper. "Justice, she is served," he said, twirling his mustache. "The little gray cells, they do not fail." He turned to Moreau. "Now perhaps a tisane to calm the nerves, non?" As Thorne was led away, his defiance gone, the lounge grew still. Evelyn's sobs echoed, a lament for love betrayed. The casino's candelabra flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to bow to Poirot's brilliance. The key, the receipt, the ledger, all had led to this moment. The Ivory Casino, its secrets laid bare, stood quiet, its opulence restored by truth. But as Poirot stepped into the corridor, a faint sound, a rustle, caught his ear. He paused, cane raised, but the hall was empty, the shadows still. "The game is done," he whispered, yet the air held a lingering chill. The Mediterranean whispered peace, and Poirot, satisfied, walked into the dawn, his mind at rest. The mystery of the Ivory Casino was resolved, and the truth shone like the sun over Monte Carlo.